It was supposed to be a routine transatlantic red-eye, but when a ruthless Chicago syndicate boss boarded with a terrified, screaming 4-year-old, the cabin pressure reached a breaking point. No one dared to intervene, until one flight attendant risked her life to speak a language no one else heard. The tarmac at Teterboro Airport was slick with October rain, reflecting the runway lights like scattered diamonds. Inside the cabin of the Bombardier Global 7500, Chloe Gallagher was making her final preparations. As a senior flight attendant for VistaJet, Chloe was accustomed to serving high-net-worth individuals, tech billionaires, European royalty, and Hollywood elite. She knew how to pour a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux without spilling a drop, and she knew how to keep her eyes averted when confidential documents were left on the walnut folding tables. But tonight's manifest was different. The primary passenger was listed simply as S. Costello. Anyone who read the Chicago Tribune or caught whispers in the high-end lounges of Manhattan knew the name Silas Costello. He was the undisputed head of the Costello Syndicate, a man whose legitimate logistics empire was a razor-thin veneer over decades of organized crime, extortion, and port racketeering. "They're here," whispered Gemma, the junior flight attendant, peering through the small galley window. Her hands were shaking slightly as she adjusted her silk scarf. 3 black Escalades. They drove right up to the stairs. "Deep breaths, Gemma," Chloe said, her voice steady, though her own heart rhythm had noticeably ticked up. "Treat them like any other client. We offer them champagne, we secure the cabin, and we disappear into the galley. We are ghosts tonight." The heavy cabin door swung open, letting in a gust of cold New Jersey air, followed immediately by 3 men who seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. 2 were built like brick walls, wearing tailored charcoal suits that poorly concealed the heavy firearms holstered beneath their jackets. The lead bodyguard, a scarred, flat-nosed man named Victor Sterling, swept the cabin with dead, calculating eyes before nodding to the doorway. Then Silas Costello boarded. He wasn't the caricature of a mobster. Silas was 34, impeccably dressed in a bespoke, midnight blue Brioni suit, with sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair combed neatly back. He possessed an aura of quiet, suffocating authority. But the terrifying syndicate boss wasn't holding a briefcase or a weapon. He was holding a screaming, thrashing 4-year-old boy. The child, Leo, was absolutely hysterical. His small face was flushed dark red, tears streaming down his cheeks as he flailed wildly, striking his father's chest with tiny, clenched fists. The sound was deafening, a raw, visceral wail of pure panic that immediately filled the confined space of the aircraft. "Shh, Leo. I've got you." "Stop it now," Silas muttered, his deep voice a rumble of strained patience. He didn't look like a mob boss in that moment. He looked like a desperate, exhausted father, teetering on the edge of his sanity. Silas forcibly buckled the struggling child into the plush leather seat of the main club suite. Leo kicked the mahogany table, screaming so hard no sound came out for a few seconds before the wailing resumed. Victor and the other bodyguard stood awkwardly in the aisle, useless mountains of muscle entirely defeated by a 40-pound toddler. "Sir, can I offer you—" Gemma started, stepping out of the galley with a silver tray of water and warm towels. "Get back," Victor barked, stepping into her path. Gemma let out a small yelp, the water sloshing over the crystal glasses. "Vic, back off!" Silas snapped, rubbing his temples as Leo continued to shriek, slapping his hands over his own ears. Silas looked up at the trembling junior attendant. "No drinks. Just tell the captain to get this bird in the air. Now. We need to be in Geneva by morning." "Row right away, Mr. Costello," Gemma stammered, fleeing to the cockpit. Chloe remained in the galley, watching the scene unfold as the Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines hummed to life. The plane began its taxi. Usually, the white noise of the engines lulled anxious flyers, but as the jet accelerated down the runway and lifted into the night sky, Leo's distress only amplified. 30 minutes into the flight, the situation had deteriorated from stressful to agonizing. They were cruising at 41,000 feet, and Leo hadn't stopped crying for a single second. The boy was curling into a tight ball in his seat, violently shaking his head from side to side, his hands clamped firmly over his ears. Silas was pacing the aisle, running a hand through his previously immaculate hair, his tie loosened. The atmosphere in the cabin was volatile. Victor looked ready to shoot the fuselage just to end the noise. The intercom in the galley buzzed. Chloe picked it up. "Captain? Chloe, is everything secure back there?" "Everything?" Captain Harrison asked, his voice tight. "I can hear that kid through the reinforced cockpit door. We've got another 7 hours to Switzerland. Is there anything you can do?" "I'll handle it," Chloe said firmly. She hung up the phone. She had watched Silas try to speak to the boy, trying to soothe him, bribe him, and sternly command him to stop. None of it registered. It was as if Leo was trapped behind an impenetrable wall of glass. Chloe unlocked the galley door and stepped out into the main cabin. As Chloe moved down the aisle, Victor immediately stepped into her path, his massive frame blocking the way to the VIP suite. "Boss said no service. Go back to your hole." Chloe didn't flinch. She had dealt with drunk politicians and entitled billionaires. A mob enforcer was just a bully with a bigger paycheck. "Mr. Sterling, is it? Your boss is going to lose his mind, and that child is going to hyperventilate and pass out. I can help. Now move, or explain to Mr. Costello why you let his son suffocate on his own tears." Victor's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Silas's voice cut through the noise. "Let her through, Vic." Victor stepped aside. Chloe approached the club seating area. Silas was sitting across from Leo, looking utterly defeated. The dangerous Mafia boss looked broken, staring at his son with a mixture of profound love and helpless rage. "I don't know what's wrong with him," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, ragged rasp, almost as if he were confessing a sin. "I just got custody of him 3 days ago. His mother, she kept him away. She said the raid at the compound last year broke him. She said he's been mute ever since. He won't talk, he won't listen. He just screams." Chloe looked closely at the 4-year-old. Leo wasn't just throwing a tantrum. He was pressing his palms desperately against his ears, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes wide and darting around the cabin in sheer terror. "He's not ignoring the sound," Chloe realized with a sudden jolt of clarity. "He's feeling the pressure." Cabin pressurization changes cause the air in the middle ear to expand or contract. For a child, the pain of popping ears can be excruciating, but usually you tell a child to swallow or give them something to chew. Silas had been talking to him, assuming the boy was just too traumatized to respond. Chloe looked at the way Leo's eyes tracked movements, how he ignored sounds originating from behind him, and how heavily he relied on visual cues. Her younger sister, Sarah, had been born profoundly deaf. Chloe had spent her entire life navigating the world in silence alongside her. She recognized the signs instantly. "Mr. Costello," Chloe said softly. "He's not traumatized into silence. He's deaf." Silas froze. The air in the cabin seemed to instantly freeze with him. Victor's hand instinctively drifted toward his jacket, sensing a shift in his boss's demeanor. Silas slowly turned his dark eyes toward Chloe, a terrifying, predatory intensity radiating from him. "What did you just say to me?" Silas demanded, his voice dangerously low. "I said your son can't hear you," Chloe replied, holding her ground. "His ears are hurting from the altitude pressure, and he is terrified because he doesn't understand what is happening to his body, and he can't hear you trying to explain it to him." His mother, Camilla, said he had psychological aphasia. She had the best doctors in Manhattan. Silas started, his chest heaving. Then she lied to you, or she bought the doctors, Chloe said bluntly. She didn't have time to navigate the toxic dynamics of a Mafia divorce. The boy was in pain. Chloe knelt on the plush carpet right in front of Leo. She reached out and gently touched his knee to get his attention. Leo flinched, opening his tear-filled eyes to look at her. Chloe smiled, a warm, genuine expression. She raised her hands, keeping them in his line of sight, and began to move her fingers fluidly. "Hi," she signed in American Sign Language. "My name is Chloe. You're on an airplane. You are safe." Leo's crying hitched. He hiccuped, his chest heaving, but his eyes locked onto her hands. He had never seen this woman before, but suddenly, the chaotic, terrifying world made sense. Someone was speaking his language. Silas watched in absolute stunned silence. He watched as his son, who had been an inconsolable terror for the last 48 hours, suddenly stopped screaming. Chloe pointed to her own ear, then made a face of pain, signing, "Ear hurt?" Leo hesitated. Then slowly, with trembling little hands, he mirrored the sign for hurt, pointing to his ear. "I know." "It is the air," Chloe signed back. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small pack of gummy bears she kept for child passengers. She opened it, exaggeratedly popped one into her own mouth, and made a big show of chewing and swallowing. She then offered one to Leo. "Chew, it helps the pain go away." Leo took the red gummy bear. He put it in his mouth and started chewing aggressively. Within 30 seconds, the eustachian tubes in his ears popped, equalizing the pressure. The immediate relief was visible on the child's face. The tension drained from his small shoulders, and he slumped back against the leather seat, exhausted but calm. He looked at Chloe, his tiny hands coming up to his chest. He rubbed a closed fist in a circle over his heart. "Sorry," he signed. Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. She smiled and patted his knee. "It is okay. You are a brave boy." The silence in the cabin was heavier than the screaming had been. The only sound was the steady hum of the jet engines. Chloe slowly stood up and turned to face Silas Costello. The ruthless syndicate boss was staring at his son, tears pooling in his sharp, dark eyes. The realization of his ex-wife's betrayal, hiding their son's condition, likely out of some twisted shame or desire to keep the boy isolated and controllable, was crashing down on him. All the times he had yelled at the boy to listen over the past 3 days, all the times he thought his son hated him. "She knew," Silas whispered, his voice cracking with a dangerous, lethal grief. "Camilla knew. She told me he was broken. She locked him away in that house with nannies who didn't know how to speak to him." Silas looked up at Chloe. The predatory edge was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, intense vulnerability. "Teach me," Silas said, stepping toward her. He wasn't giving a command as a boss. He was begging as a father. "Please, tell me what he said. Tell me how to talk to my son." Chloe looked at the man who commanded armies of criminals, now standing before her, asking for the simplest tool in the world, the ability to say hello to his child. "He said he was sorry," Chloe replied softly. Silas closed his eyes, a rogue tear slipping down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily, but didn't look away from Chloe. "How do I tell him he never has to apologize to me? How do I tell him I love him?" Chloe raised her right hand, extending her thumb, index finger, and pinky. "Like this," she demonstrated. "It's the sign for, I love you." Silas mirrored her hand. His large, calloused fingers, which had undoubtedly ended lives and destroyed empires, awkwardly formed the delicate sign. He turned to Leo, who was watching them with heavy, sleepy eyes. Silas held up his hand, making the sign. Leo's eyes widened slightly. A small, exhausted smile crept onto the boy's face. He raised his own tiny hand and signed it back. In that moment, hovering 41,000 feet above the Atlantic, the hardened shell of Silas Costello cracked entirely. And as he looked back at Chloe Gallagher, the flight attendant who had just rescued his entire world from silence, Chloe realized that her life was about to become dangerously, irreversibly intertwined with the Chicago Syndicate. The descent into Geneva's Cointrin Airport was marked by the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps piercing through the morning mist. Inside the cabin of the bombardier jet, the atmosphere had shifted from volatile panic to a hushed, reverent calm. Leo was fast asleep, his small head resting on Chloe's lap. Silas Costello sat across from them, his dark eyes studying the flight attendant not as a servant, but as a savior. "VistaJet pays you well, I assume," Silas murmured, his voice a low rumble over the engine noise. He casually adjusted the platinum Patek Philippe Nautilus on his wrist. "They pay me enough to pour champagne and ignore the things I see," Chloe replied softly, gently stroking Leo's dark hair. "I want to buy out your contract," Silas stated. "It wasn't a question. Whatever they pay you, I'll triple it. I need you in Geneva, for a month, maybe 2, until I can learn this language, until Leo trusts me." Chloe looked up. Leaving her career to become a private nanny and translator for the head of the Chicago Syndicate was a terrifying proposition. Silas Costello was a dangerous man. But as she looked down at the sleeping boy, she knew she couldn't abandon him to a world of silence, surrounded by men who only spoke the language of violence. 1 month, Chloe agreed, her voice steady. "Strictly as a tutor for you, and a guide for Leo. And no guns around the boy." A ghost of a smile touched Silas's lips. "Deal." 2 hours later, they arrived at Silas's private estate in Cologne, a wealthy municipality overlooking the pristine waters of Lake Geneva. The property was less a home and more a luxurious fortress. High limestone walls, state-of-the-art biometric security perimeters, and patrolling guards with concealed weapons stood in stark contrast to the breathtaking, tranquil views of the lake and the distant jet dough. For the first 48 hours, life at the estate was a fragile, beautiful bubble. Chloe transformed the grand, echoing library into a classroom. She taught Silas the foundational elements of American Sign Language. The ruthless Mafia boss proved to be an intensely dedicated student. Chloe watched as a man accustomed to issuing lethal orders with a single word now patiently, awkwardly practiced the manual alphabet. The breakthrough came on the 3rd evening. Silas was sitting on the Persian rug with Leo, building a towering structure out of wooden blocks. Leo accidentally knocked it over and shrank back, expecting to be yelled at, a reflex ingrained by his mother. Instead, Silas raised his hands and clumsily but clearly signed, "Accident. It is okay. Build again." Leo's eyes widened in sheer wonder. He looked at Silas, then at Chloe, and finally back at his father. For the first time in his 4 years of life, Leo smiled at his dad. He reached out and handed Silas a red block. The tension in Silas's broad shoulders completely evaporated, replaced by a profound, overwhelming paternal devotion. He looked at Chloe, his eyes communicating a gratitude that words, or signs, could never capture. But the Costello Syndicate did not allow for peace, and a storm was brewing across the Atlantic. On the 4th morning, the biometric alarms at the front gates blared, a harsh, screeching klaxon that shattered the tranquility of the estate. Chloe was in the kitchen, preparing a snack for Leo, when Victor Sterling burst through the swinging doors, a matte black Glock 19 already drawn. "Get the boy. Move to the panic room now," Victor barked, his face pale and grim. "What's happening?" Chloe asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. She scooped Leo up, the boy immediately looking alarmed by the sudden, jerky movements, though he couldn't hear the sirens. "It's Camilla." Silas's voice was cold as ice as he entered the kitchen, sliding a loaded magazine into an Sig Sauer pistol. The loving father was gone. The syndicate boss had returned. She didn't come alone. She brought Dominic Rossi and a dozen hitters from the New York factions. "His mother brought armed men to take him?" Chloe gasped, horrified. "She doesn't want Leo," Silas sneered, his eyes burning with lethal fury. "My late father set up an ironclad Vanguard trust fund for his first grandson. Billions in clean, legitimate tech and real estate assets. The only way Camilla can touch it is if she has sole physical custody of Leo, and I am proven unfit or dead." Camilla hadn't just hidden Leo's deafness to manipulate the boy. She had fabricated the psychological trauma to build a legal case that Silas's violent lifestyle had broken the child's mind. She was staging a raid to kill Silas and reclaim her golden ticket. "Take the boy to the wine cellar," Silas ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Behind the racks of the Chateau Lafite, there is a reinforced steel door. Enter the code 0418. Lock it from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me." Silas stepped close to Chloe. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek for a fleeting second. "Keep my heart safe, Chloe." Chloe nodded, her throat tight. She grabbed Leo, tightly securing him to her chest, and ran. The massive Geneva estate erupted into a war zone. As Chloe sprinted down the long, marble corridors toward the subterranean levels, the heavy thud of suppressed submachine gun fire echoed through the mansion. Leo was panicked. He couldn't hear the gunshots, but he could feel the terrifying, concussive vibrations trembling through the floorboards and the walls. He began to thrash in Chloe's arms, his face contorting into a silent scream of absolute terror. "No, no, no, Leo, not now," Chloe thought frantically. If he started crying, the physical struggle would slow them down, and Rossi's men were sweeping the house quickly. Chloe ducked behind a heavy mahogany credenza in the hallway, just as two armed men in tactical gear rounded the corner at the far end of the hall. She pressed Leo against her chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. She needed him to be perfectly still. She pulled back slightly so Leo could see her face. She forced her expression to be calm, offering him a brave, reassuring smile, even as her hands trembled. She brought her hands up into his line of sight. "Game," she signed rapidly. "We are playing a hiding game. You must be still as a statue. Brave boy." Leo stared at her hands, his lower lip quivering. He felt another heavy vibration as a door was kicked open down the hall. He looked up at Chloe, terrified. Chloe touched his nose affectionately, then signed, "I am here. Daddy is coming. Hide now." Miraculously, the silent communication grounded him. The visual anchor of the language cut through the chaotic sensory overload of the vibrations. Leo clamped his little hands over his mouth and nodded, burying his face into Chloe's shoulder. Chloe scrambled down the stairs to the wine cellar. The air grew cool and damp, smelling of aged oak and expensive earth. She navigated through the labyrinth of floor-to-ceiling wine racks, her eyes scanning the labels until she found the section of Chateau Lafite Rothschild. She pushed hard against the rack. It swung open silently on hidden hinges, revealing a heavy, biometric steel door. She punched in the code, 0418. The door hissed open. She rushed inside with Leo and hit the internal lockdown button. Heavy deadbolts slammed into place, sealing them in a small, windowless concrete bunker equipped with monitors, emergency supplies, and a separate ventilation system. On the security monitors, Chloe watched the nightmare unfold in high definition. Silas and Victor were executing a masterclass in tactical defense. Silas moved with terrifying efficiency, a predator defending his den. He and his security team systematically neutralized Rossi's men in the grand foyer, the library, and the courtyard. Then, Chloe saw the feed from the main living room. Silas had a man pinned to the floor, Dominic Rossi. Standing a few feet away, looking impeccable in a white Chanel suit despite the carnage, was Camilla. Chloe watched, breathless, as Silas pointed his weapon at Rossi's head, but his eyes were locked on his ex-wife. There was no audio on the feed, but Chloe didn't need to hear the words. The absolute disgust and wrath on Silas's face told the entire story. Camilla raised her hands, pleading, her facade of control entirely shattered as she realized her coup had failed. Silas didn't shoot them. He motioned for Victor, who aggressively zip-tied Rossi and Camilla. Silas Costello was a Mafia boss, but he was also a man who knew that a bloodbath in a Swiss municipality would bring down the wrath of Interpol. He had something worse planned for Camilla. Total ruin. He would take her freedom, her reputation, and her access to a single dime of his family's money, legally burying her in extortion charges with the evidence of this unprovoked raid. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door of the panic room clicked and slowly swung open. Silas stood in the doorway. His bespoke suit was ruined, torn at the shoulder, and there was a smear of blood across his cheekbone. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild as he scanned the small room. When his gaze landed on Chloe and Leo huddled in the corner, the lethal syndicate boss vanished. He dropped his weapon onto the floor, kicking it away, and fell to his knees. Leo didn't hesitate. He scrambled out of Chloe's arms and ran to his father. Silas caught the boy, burying his face in Leo's neck, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, overwhelming relief. Chloe watched them, tears streaming down her own face. She slowly stood up, intending to give them space, but Silas reached out and caught her wrist. He pulled her down onto the floor with them, wrapping his other arm tightly around her waist, pulling her into their embrace. "You kept him safe," Silas whispered, his voice hoarse, resting his forehead against hers. "You kept my soul safe." Silas pulled back slightly. He looked at Leo, then raised his hands, his fingers slightly trembling from the adrenaline. "Safe now," Silas signed to his son. "Daddy is here. Chloe is here. Always." Leo beamed, signing back the sloppy, beautiful gesture for "I love you." Silas looked deeply into Chloe's eyes. The danger of his world had been laid bare, but so had his capacity for profound love. "I told you I wanted you for a month," Silas said softly. "I lied. I want you to stay forever. I am leaving the syndicate to Victor. I'm taking the Vanguard trust, and I'm going legitimate. For Leo. For you. If you'll have us." Chloe looked at the terrified little boy who had become her world in a matter of days, and the terrifying man who was willing to burn down his own empire to become a good father. She raised her hand and gently brushed the blood from Silas's cheek. She didn't need to speak. She just raised her hand and signed, yes. Did this intense story of unexpected love, Mafia betrayal, and the beautiful power of sign language keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved Chloe and Silas's journey to protect little Leo, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired audio dramas. Turn on notifications so you never miss a twist.